When the storm finally broke over the shattered plains of Asgard, it did so with the sound of worlds tearing apart. Thor stood amid scorched stone and splintered spires, his chest heaving as lightning crawled across his armor like living fire. In his grip, Mjolnir hummed with barely contained power. Across from him, Loki staggered back, cloak torn, green magic bleeding from his fingers in erratic sparks. This was no longer a battle of pride or rivalry. It was desperation. "You never learn," Thor said, his voice carrying the weight of thunder restrained by will alone. "Every lie ends the same way." Loki laughed, but it was sharp and brittle, the sound of someone cornered. "You always think you understand how things end," he replied. "That is your greatest flaw." The trickster slammed his staff into the ground, and reality screamed. The air folded inward, colors bleeding into one another as space itself twisted. A vortex of impossible geometry tore open behind Loki, emerald and obsidian light spiraling into a widening maw. The ground fractured, stone lifting as if gravity itself had lost interest in Asgard. The pull was immediate and violent. Thor felt his footing vanish. He drove Mjolnir into the ground, muscles straining as the hammer anchored him against the drag of the rift. He looked up just in time to see Loki's expression change from triumph to horror. "This was not how it was supposed to open," Loki whispered. The vortex surged. Thor lunged, abandoning his anchor, reaching for his brother. For a heartbeat, their hands nearly touched. Then the rift swallowed them both. Thor's scream was lost in the collapse of dimensions. There was no sensation of motion, only the feeling of being unraveled and rewritten at once. Light without color, sound without vibration. The certainty that he was falling through something that was not space, not time, but the absence of both. His grip tightened reflexively around Mjolnir as consciousness slipped away. When awareness returned, it did so painfully. Cold, weightlessness, silence so complete it felt oppressive. Thor's eyes fluttered open to darkness pierced by distant pinpricks of light. Stars. Not the stars of any sky he knew. These were wrong, too sharp, too orderly. He tried to move and found his body drifting, cape billowing slowly behind him. No wind, no ground, no familiar pull of gravity. Before confusion could fully form, pain followed. His thoughts blurred. The last thing he felt was the hammer tugging in his grasp, as if urging him to hold on. Then everything went black again. Across the universe, the Enterprise moved through warp with practiced ease. The bridge of the Enterprise D was quiet in the way only a Starfleet vessel could be. Not silence, but controlled purpose. Consoles hummed, displays flickered. The ship cut a graceful path through folded space-time, bound for a routine survey that promised little more than data logs and stellar readings. Captain Jean-Luc Picard sat upright in his chair, hands resting lightly on the armrests, eyes calm and observant. To his right, Commander Riker stood relaxed but alert. Data monitored operations with flawless precision. Worf scanned tactical displays out of habit more than necessity. Then the universe misbehaved. An alarm chirped, not shrill, not urgent, just enough to demand attention. Worf stiffened. "Captain, sensors detect a sudden spatial distortion ahead, energy levels rising rapidly." Picard's gaze sharpened. "Source?" "Unknown," Worf replied. "The anomaly formed without precursor signatures." Data turned from his console. "Captain, the energy profile does not correspond to known wormholes or subspace fractures. The fluctuation appears multidimensional in nature." Riker raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Meaning, Data said evenly, that something is intersecting our space from outside our universal frame of reference. The Enterprise dropped from warp on Picard's command. Stars snapped back into place as the view screen magnified a region of empty space. Then empty became impossible. Space bent, light distorted. A tear opened where nothing should exist. The anomaly writhed like a wound in reality, shedding arcs of energy that danced across the Enterprise's shields. "Shields up," Picard ordered. "Shields holding," Worf confirmed. The tear pulsed once, violently, and something was expelled. "Life sign detected," Data announced. "Single humanoid, fading but present." Picard did not hesitate. "Transporter lock. Beam him directly to sickbay." In sickbay, Dr. Beverly Crusher barely had time to register the transport signal before the biobed filled with light. The man who appeared was massive, armored, burned, still clutching a hammer that scanners immediately failed to classify. His vital signs flickered dangerously low, yet his cellular integrity remained impossibly stable. "This is not human physiology," Crusher murmured as she began scanning, "but it's close enough to be unsettling." A containment field snapped into place as a precaution. Even unconscious, the patient radiated power. Instruments crackled. Energy readings spiked and settled without explanation. Then he moved. His eyes snapped open, blue light flaring like contained lightning. "Where am I?" he demanded, voice booming through sickbay with enough force to rattle instruments and send nurses scrambling backward. Crusher held her ground. "You're safe," she said firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You're aboard a Federation starship. You were found drifting in space." Thor tried to sit up. The containment field flared as he met resistance. Confusion crossed his face, followed by anger, then restraint. "This is not Asgard," he said slowly. "No," Crusher replied. "It isn't." Thor looked down at himself, at the unfamiliar equipment, the sterile white walls, the glow of alien technology. He tightened his grip on Mjolnir instinctively, feeling its reassuring weight. "Then," he said quietly, "I have fallen farther than I thought." Thor's breath came slow and deliberate as he tested the strange resistance holding him in place. The faint shimmer of energy around the bed reacted to his movement, rippling like disturbed water. His eyes narrowed, lightning flickering briefly beneath the surface before he forced it back. Wherever he was, raw force would not serve him yet. "I do not know this magic," he said, his voice lower now, measured. "Release me." Dr. Crusher met his gaze steadily. Years of Starfleet service had taught her that panic and fear helped no one, especially not in a room with an unknown being radiating power. "It isn't magic," she replied. "It's a containment field. It's for everyone's safety, including yours." Thor tilted his head slightly, studying her. He sensed no deception, no hostility, only concern. That alone stayed his hand. "You speak without fear," he observed. "I've treated Klingons twice your size and beings made of pure energy," Crusher said. "You don't frighten me, you worry me." That seemed to surprise him. His grip on the hammer loosened just a fraction. "Then you are a healer," he said. "I will not harm you." The containment field dimmed, responding to Crusher's command. Not fully disengaged, but relaxed enough to allow him limited movement. Thor slowly swung his legs over the side of the biobed, boots touching the deck with a heavy metallic thud that echoed through sickbay. Across the ship, Picard watched the feed from sickbay on his ready room display. He observed Thor's every movement with the practiced calm of a man who had faced godlike entities before and learned that respect was often the best defense. "Counselor Troy," Picard said, turning slightly, "what do you sense?" Troy closed her eyes briefly, focusing. "He's disoriented," she said softly. "Confused, but not hostile. There's a great deal of loss there, Captain. And responsibility. He carries it heavily," Picard nodded. "Then we proceed carefully," he tapped his comm badge. "Picard to sickbay," Crusher responded immediately. "He's awake, Captain. Cooperative so far." Picard rose. "I'm on my way." Thor turned as the doors to sickbay slid open. He did not need heightened senses to recognize authority when he saw it. The man who entered carried himself not with fear or aggression, but with quiet command. That alone earned a measure of respect. "I am Jean-Luc Picard," the man said, "captain of this vessel." Thor straightened instinctively, squaring his shoulders. "I am Thor," he replied, "son of Odin." The room seemed to hold its breath. Crusher glanced between them, then back to her instruments. "Captain," she said carefully, "his vital signs remain stable. His physiology is extraordinary." Picard inclined his head slightly toward Thor. "You were found drifting unconscious in space after emerging from a spatial anomaly. If you are able, I would like to understand how that came to be." Thor looked down at Mjolnir, thumb tracing one of the etched runes. "I was in battle," he said. "A rift opened, not of my making. I was cast through it." "A rift between universes," Data's voice said from the doorway as he entered sickbay, curiosity evident but controlled. "Captain, preliminary analysis suggests the anomaly functioned as an interdimensional bridge." Thor's eyes flicked to Data, assessing. "You are not alive," he said flatly. Data blinked. "I am an android," he replied. "I am alive in the functional sense, though my consciousness is artificial." Thor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "A crafted mind," he said. "We have such things in Asgard, though they are rare." "You are impressive." Data tilted his head. "Thank you." Picard raised an eyebrow, but allowed the exchange to pass. "Thor," he said, "you claim to be the son of Odin. In our history, Odin and Thor are figures of ancient mythology." Thor smiled faintly. "Then your ancestors remembered us," he said. "That is comforting." Troy stepped forward. "You're far from home," she said gently. "Yes," Thor replied, his expression darkening. "And I do not yet know where my brother is." The mention of a brother sent a ripple of emotion through him that Troy felt immediately. Guilt, anger, fear. Picard gestured toward a nearby chair. "Please," he said. "Sit, we can talk." Thor hesitated, then set Mjolnir carefully against the biobed. The deck plates creaked slightly under the hammer's weight, though no one had seen it move. He sat, posture rigid but controlled. "This ship," Thor said, looking around. "It flies without wind or beast." "Yes," Picard replied. "We use warp propulsion, faster than light travel." Thor considered that. "Then you are explorers," he said. "Like us, though your tools are different." "That's one way to put it," Riker said as he entered sickbay, arms crossed loosely. "Captain." Picard nodded. "Commander Riker, Thor." Thor inclined his head. "Warrior." Riker smiled faintly. "Something like that." Data leaned closer to Crusher, speaking quietly. "Doctor, the hammer's mass density exceeds known materials by several orders of magnitude. Yet structural stress readings on the deck are within acceptable limits." Crusher murmured back. "Meaning?" meaning the hammer may possess properties that selectively interact with gravitational forces. Thor overheard and allowed himself a small smile. Mjolnir chooses how heavy it is, he said. Not the other way around. Data paused. Fascinating. Picard returned his focus to Thor. You said you were in battle. Against whom? Thor's jaw tightened. Loki, he said. My brother. A liar. A schemer. But still, my responsibility. Troy felt the pain beneath the words and spoke carefully. You believe his actions led you here? Yes, Thor replied. And if he yet lives, then this rift may not have closed for him as it did for me. That gave Picard pause. Interdimensional incursions were dangerous enough without the addition of another unknown entity. Captain, Data said, if the rift was unstable, it is statistically possible that only one object passed through before collapse. Thor looked at him. Or he fell elsewhere, he said quietly. Picard rose. We will assist you, he said. But first, you must understand where you are. You are in the United Federation of Planets. We are explorers, diplomats, and when necessary, defenders. We do not worship gods. Thor met his gaze steadily. Nor do I demand worship, he said. That is a trait of tyrants, not protectors. That answer seemed to settle something unseen in the room. Crusher glanced at Picard. Captain, medically speaking, he should rest. Whatever energy carried him here nearly killed him. Thor shook his head. I will endure. Picard smiled faintly. You already have, he said, but endurance does not preclude wisdom. You will have time. The universe is not going anywhere. Thor considered this strange, calm man and nodded once. Very well, he said. But know this, Captain Picard. I will not remain idle if this world is threatened. Picard clasped his hands behind his back. Then, he said, we may find we have much in common. Outside sickbay, the Enterprise continued its silent glide through the stars, unaware that the balance of several realities had just shifted. Thor slept, but it was not the deep, peaceful rest of a warrior returned home. It was a guarded stillness, like a storm banked behind a mountain, waiting. His dreams were fragments, the crack of thunder without rain, Loki's laughter echoing through endless dark, the sensation of falling without end. Each time his body tensed, the containment field around the biobed flickered, instruments reacting to surges of exotic energy that defied easy classification. Dr. Crusher watched the readings with a mixture of concern and fascination. Even at rest, the man's physiology resisted every baseline she attempted to apply. His cells repaired microscopic damage almost as quickly as it formed. His neural activity suggested dreams of remarkable intensity, and threaded through it all was energy, not radiation, not subspace, something older, deeper, woven into him at a fundamental level. He's stabilizing, she said quietly, mostly to herself. Across the ship, Captain Picard convened a small conference in the observation lounge. The stars drifted slowly beyond the transparent aluminum, a serene counterpoint to the discussion unfolding within. Thoughts, Picard said, hands folded, eyes moving between Riker, Data, Troy, and Worf. Riker leaned back slightly. He doesn't feel like a threat, he said. At least not intentionally. But if even half of what he claims is true, we're talking about someone with abilities that rival some of the most powerful entities we've encountered. Worf crossed his arms. He carries himself like a warrior of honor, he said. But honor does not prevent destruction. His weapon alone is enough to concern me, Data nodded. Mjolnir, he said. If his statements are accurate, it is a selectively responsive artifact, bonded to his bioenergetic signature. I am unable to determine its full capabilities. Troy spoke last. He feels burdened, she said. Not arrogant, not cruel. He believes protecting others is his duty, and he believes he has failed at it. Picard absorbed this. That may be the most dangerous combination of all, he said quietly. A being of great power who feels personally responsible for every outcome. An alert chimed softly. Captain, Data said, glancing at his console. The patient's neural activity has shifted. He is regaining consciousness. Picard stood. Then it's time we spoke again. Thor awoke more slowly this time. The sharp confusion of before was gone, replaced by a wary awareness. He sat up, testing his strength. The field no longer resisted him. His hammer rested nearby, untouched. That alone told him much. Picard entered without ceremony. Good evening, he said. Thor regarded him. Your healers are skilled, he said. I feel clearer. I'm glad, Picard replied. There are things we need to discuss. Thor nodded. Then speak. Picard took a seat opposite him, deliberately placing himself at eye level. You are not in your universe, he said. Whatever event brought you here crossed boundaries we barely understand. That alone has consequences. Thor's expression darkened. I did not choose this. No, Picard agreed. But intent does not erase impact. If your presence here attracts others like you, or destabilizes our reality, my responsibility is to protect my people. Thor met his gaze without flinching. As it is mine to protect mine, he said, even if I am far from them. A moment of silence passed between them, not tense, but weighted. You speak of gods, Picard said at last. In our experience, beings once worshipped as gods are often simply advanced life forms. Thor smiled slightly. That argument has been made before, he said. Sometimes it is even correct, but titles matter less than actions. Call me what you will. I am still who I am. Picard considered that. Very well. Then tell me who you are, Thor of Asgard. Thor leaned back, eyes distant. I was born to power, he said, trained to wield it. I have failed, learned, failed again. I have saved worlds and nearly destroyed them. I am not wise, Captain. I am learning. Troy, standing nearby, felt the sincerity of the words resonate deeply. Picard inclined his head. Then you will find Starfleet a place that values learning above all. Before Thor could respond, the ship shuddered slightly, not violently, but enough to be felt. Worf's voice came over the comm. Bridge to Captain Picard. We are detecting a subspace fluctuation off the starboard bow, similar to the previous anomaly, though significantly weaker. Thor's head snapped up. That is no coincidence, he said. Whatever path I fell through may still echo. Picard tapped his comm badge. Understood. I'm on my way. On the bridge, the stars rippled subtly, as if space itself were remembering a wound. Magnitude, Picard asked calmly. Minimal, Data replied, but the energy signature matches residual traces from the initial rift. Thor stepped forward, eyes narrowing. It is like a footprint, he said. A path walked too forcefully. Riker glanced at him. Can you track it? Thor hesitated. Perhaps, he said, but if I do, I may widen it. Picard turned to face him fully. Then we must decide which risk is greater, he said, doing nothing or acting with incomplete knowledge. Thor looked at the stars, then at the crew moving with disciplined calm around him. Mortals, he thought. Fragile. brave. "If my brother yet lives," Thor said quietly, "he will not stop. Loki never does." That name sent a ripple through Troy, sharp and uneasy. Picard weighed the words carefully. "Then we will proceed cautiously," he said. "Together." Data's console chimed again. "Captain, I am detecting an object forming within the fluctuation. Mass unknown." Worf's hand hovered near tactical controls. "Shield standing by." Thor's fingers tightened around Mjolnir's handle. Lightning flickered briefly, contained. "Whatever comes," Picard said evenly, "we meet it as explorers, not conquerors." The distortion brightened, light twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The Enterprise held position, shields humming softly. Thor felt the universe lean. The distortion did not open like the first. It did not tear or scream its way into existence. Instead, it condensed, light folding inward until space itself seemed to hesitate. Sensors struggled to keep up, recalibrating as the anomaly stabilized into a thin, luminous seam hanging against the starfield like a scar that refused to heal. Data's voice was calm but intent. "Captain, the fluctuation has reached equilibrium. It is not expanding." "Yet," Riker said. Worf's eyes remained fixed on tactical displays. "No weapon signatures detected," he reported, "but the energy output is increasing." Thor stepped closer to the view screen, his presence subtly changing the atmosphere on the bridge. It was not menace. It was gravity. "This is not a gateway," he said. "It is an echo, a resonance left behind." Picard turned to him. "Can it be closed?" Thor shook his head slowly. "Not from this side. It will fade on its own, or it will be answered." As if in response, the seam pulsed. A shape emerged. Not a ship, not a being. A construct. Angular, metallic, unfamiliar. It unfolded itself from the distortion like a thought given form, surfaces shifting as if adjusting to local physics. Its silhouette suggested intention rather than design. Data's fingers moved rapidly. "Object composition unknown. It is emitting a low-level subspace signal, possibly a probe." Thor's jaw tightened. "Loki sends watchers before he acts," he said. "Always." Worf looked at him sharply. "You believe this device belongs to your brother?" "Yes," Thor replied. "Or something that has noticed his passage." Picard considered this carefully. "Open a channel," he said. "If it can receive," Data complied. "Channel open." Silence. Then a voice filled the bridge. Not sound, exactly. Meaning. Words translated after the fact by the universal translator, stripped of tone but heavy with implication. "This continuum is unregistered." Troy stiffened, eyes narrowing. "It's not speaking to us," she said quietly. "It's assessing." Picard leaned forward slightly. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You have entered our space. State your purpose." The construct rotated slowly, surfaces shifting. "Deviation detected," the voice replied. "Foreign constant present." Thor felt the words like a pressure against his chest. "It senses me," he said. "Foreign constant," Data repeated. "Captain, it may be identifying Thor as an anomaly relative to this universe's baseline parameters." "Meaning," Riker said, "he doesn't belong here." Thor gave a humorless smile. "That much is obvious." The construct pulsed again. "Correction protocol pending." Worf's hand tightened. "That sounds hostile." Picard did not disagree. "Thor," he said evenly, "if this entity represents an attempt to correct your presence, then engaging it directly may escalate matters." Thor nodded. "Then allow me to speak." He stepped closer to the view screen, meeting the construct's alien awareness head-on. "I am Thor of Asgard," he said. "I did not come by choice. I seek no dominion here." The construct paused. Data's console flickered as new data streamed in. "It is recalculating," he said, "adjusting probability matrices." The voice returned. "Anomaly self-aware, risk variable elevated." "Captain," Worf said, "its energy output is spiking." The construct began to glow, edges sharpening, space around it bending subtly. The echo seam behind it flickered brighter. Thor raised Mjolnir slightly. Lightning danced along the hammer's head, restrained but ready. "If it intends to erase me," he said quietly, "I will not submit." Picard stood. "And neither will we," he said. "Mr. Worf, defensive posture only. No firing unless fired upon." "Aye, Captain." The construct moved first. A pulse of energy lanced toward the Enterprise. Not a weapon in the conventional sense, but a wave of corrective force, attempting to impose order where difference existed. The shields flared, absorbing the impact with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck. "Shields holding," Worf reported. "Minor fluctuations." Thor felt the energy wash over the ship and recognized it for what it was. "It is trying to align you," he said, "to make you fit." "That would be undesirable," Data observed. Picard's gaze remained steady. "Return fire," he ordered calmly. "Low yield." Phaser energy struck the construct, splashing harmlessly across its surface. It absorbed the impact, reconfigured, and adjusted its position. "Captain," Data said, "it is learning." Thor exhaled slowly. "Then I will teach it," he said. Before Picard could object, Thor hurled Mjolnir. The hammer did not travel like a projectile. It vanished in a crack of thunder and reappeared inches from the construct, slamming into it with the force of a collapsing star. Lightning erupted outward, arcing across space in brilliant veins of blue and white. The construct convulsed, structure destabilizing as its carefully balanced parameters unraveled. The echo seam behind it flickered wildly. Thor extended his hand. Mjolnir returned instantly, snapping back into his grip. The construct attempted to respond, but its form fractured, collapsing inward until it folded into itself and vanished, leaving only fading energy where it had been. Silence returned to the bridge. Worf lowered his hand from tactical controls. "Threat neutralized," he said. Data studied his readings. "The anomaly is dissipating," he confirmed. "Residual energy levels decreasing rapidly." Picard turned to Thor. "You just made our situation more visible," he said calmly. Thor nodded. "I know," he replied, "but it would have marked you regardless. My presence has already drawn attention." Troy felt it then. A distant awareness. Vast. Curious. Not malicious, but not kind. "Captain," she said quietly, "whatever sent that construct knows Thor is here now." Picard clasped his hands behind his back, eyes on the stars. "Then," he said, "we will proceed with eyes open." Thor looked at the crew of the Enterprise, mortals standing against forces that would see them corrected out of existence. He felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Respect. The echo was gone, but the sense of being observed lingered like a pressure at the back of the mind. The Enterprise resumed its course at impulse, drifting through space that now felt subtly altered, as if reality itself were aware it had been disturbed. Picard remained standing for a long moment after the anomaly faded, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the stars. "Report," he said at last. Data turned from his console. "All systems nominal, Captain. However, long-range sensors are still registering faint residual distortions consistent with interdimensional interference. They appear to be dissipating at a slow but measurable rate. In other words, Riker said, whatever just happened isn't over yet. No, Data agreed. It is statistically unlikely that this event was isolated. Thor stood near the view screen, his expression unreadable. The lightning that had danced along Mjolnir moments earlier had faded, but the air around him still felt charged, as though the universe itself had not yet exhaled. When realms brush against one another, he said, the echoes can linger, some listen for them. Picard turned slightly. Who? Thor met his gaze. Those who believe all things must exist within order, and those who resent anything that does not. Troy felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. You're not talking about your brother, she said. No, Thor replied. Loki revels in chaos. These Watchers fear it. Worf snorted softly. Then they are wise to fear you. Thor's lips curved faintly, but there was no humor in his eyes. I am not the danger here, he said. I am merely visible. Picard considered that. Which makes us visible by association, he said evenly. For now, we proceed as planned. Mr. Data, set course for Epsilon Theta. Maintain heightened sensor vigilance. Aye, Captain. As the bridge returned to a controlled calm, Picard tapped his comm badge. Picard to sickbay. Crusher's voice answered immediately. Crusher here. How is our guest? There was a pause, then a hint of awe crept into her tone. Awake, alert, and arguing with my instruments, Captain. I would appreciate it if you came down. I think you'll want to hear this directly. I'll be right there, Picard replied. He turned to Riker. You have the bridge, Riker nodded. Aye, sir. Picard then looked to Thor. Would you care to accompany me? Thor inclined his head. It would be rude not to. They stepped into the turbo lift together, the doors sliding shut with a soft hiss. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The lift hummed as it descended through the vast spine of the Enterprise. You handled yourself with restraint, Picard said at last. Thor looked at him. Do not mistake restraint for hesitation, Captain. I wouldn't dream of it, Picard replied. But you didn't destroy the construct outright. You waited. Thor's grip tightened briefly on Mjolnir. Once, he said quietly, I believed every problem could be solved with force. My father disabused me of that notion. Eventually. The turbo lift doors opened onto sickbay. Dr. Crusher stood near the central biobed, tricorder in hand, her expression a mixture of scientific fascination and professional concern. She looked up as they entered. Captain, Thor. Thor inclined his head respectfully. Healer, Crusher gestured toward the biobed. If you'll excuse the familiarity, I'd prefer you sit. My instruments are still recalibrating themselves after trying to analyze you. Thor did as instructed, sitting on the edge of the bed. The biobed sensors flickered uncertainly, then stabilized. Crusher began pacing slowly as she spoke. Your physiology is extraordinary. Your cellular density, metabolic efficiency, regenerative capacity, all far beyond any humanoid species I've encountered. And yet you're not artificial, augmented, or genetically engineered by any known method. Born this way, Thor said simply. That's the unsettling part, Crusher replied. From a medical standpoint, you shouldn't be possible. Thor smiled faintly. And yet here I am. Picard watched the exchange closely. Doctor, he asked, is he in danger? Crusher shook her head. If anything, Captain, I think the universe is in more danger than he is. His body is adapting to this environment at an accelerated rate. Whatever forces govern his biology are flexible. Thor's brow furrowed slightly. Flexible. Yes, Crusher said. Your cells are adjusting to local physical constants, slowly but deliberately. It's as if your body refuses to be out of place. Thor absorbed that in silence. Picard folded his hands. Thor, he said, we need to understand the scope of what's happening. The entity that attacked us identified you as an anomaly. That suggests there are forces beyond my experience that may intervene again. Thor met his gaze squarely. They will, he said. I have felt this before. When a realm shelters what does not belong, the custodians of reality take notice. Custodians, Picard repeated. Different names in different universes, Thor replied. In mine, they are myths. In yours, perhaps they are yet unnamed. Troy's voice came through Picard's comm badge. Captain, I'm sensing something. Picard tapped it. Go ahead, counselor. It's faint, she said, but it's growing. A presence, not hostile, not benevolent, observant. Thor closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was something heavier there. They are measuring, he said, deciding whether I am an error to be corrected or a variable to be tolerated. Crusher frowned. That doesn't sound reassuring. It rarely is, Thor replied. Picard straightened. Then we will do what we always do, he said. We gather information. We engage when necessary. And we do not assume hostility where curiosity may suffice. Thor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are unlike the kings I have known. Picard allowed himself a small smile. I'll take that as a compliment. An alarm chirped softly from Crusher's console. She glanced at it, then looked up sharply. Captain, I'm detecting a new energy fluctuation. Not external. Explain. She gestured toward Thor. It's him. Thor felt it too, a subtle pull, like gravity shifting direction. The air around him seemed to thrum, resonating with something distant and immense. The echo, he murmured. It has found a voice. Picard tapped his comm badge. Bridge, report. Riker's voice came back tight but controlled. Captain, sensors are lighting up. There's a convergence forming dead ahead. Not a rift, more like a focal point. Thor stood. Then they have chosen, he said. Chosen what? Picard asked. To speak, Thor replied. Or to act. He looked at Picard, lightning faintly flickering in his eyes. Captain, he said, whatever comes next will test more than your ship's shields. Picard met his gaze without flinching. Then, he said, we'll face it together. The convergence announced itself not with violence, but with inevitability. On the bridge, stars seemed to dim as if the universe were lowering its voice. The view screen filled with a slow coalescence of light, not tearing space apart, but persuading it to bend. The focal point stabilized, a sphere of softly rotating radiance suspended ahead of the Enterprise, perfectly centered, perfectly still. Riker stood from the captain's chair as Picard entered the bridge. Captain, he said, it just appeared. No warning spike, no buildup. That alone is troubling, Picard replied. Data studied the phenomenon intently. Captain, the structure of the convergence suggests deliberate formation rather than spontaneous occurrence. Energy flows are symmetrical, purposeful. Troy pressed her fingers lightly to her temple. It feels attentive, she said, not aggressive, but intensely focused. Thor stepped forward beside Picard, the deck plates faintly vibrating beneath his boots. They are here, he said, not as warriors, not yet. Worf growled softly. If they are not warriors, then what? Thor's eyes never left the glowing sphere. Judges. The words settled over the bridge like a weight. Picard folded his hands behind his back, posture composed despite the implications. Open a channel, he said. If they are here to judge, then we will answer. Data complied. The channel opened, and for a moment there was nothing. Then the light shifted. The sphere unfolded inward, not revealing a being, but a presence. The voice that followed did not echo through the air. It resonated through thought, translated imperfectly by technology never meant to mediate between universes. This continuum persists beyond assigned parameters. Picard did not hesitate. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You are in our space. State your intent. There was a pause, as if the presence were considering how best to define itself. Intent is maintenance. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. You seek to erase me, he said. Correction, the voice replied. Foreign constant destabilizes probability gradients. Long-term variance unacceptable. Troy inhaled sharply. It doesn't see him as a person, she said. It sees him as a variable. A familiar mistake, Picard said calmly. One we've encountered before. He stepped closer to the view screen. Thor is under our protection. He did not choose to enter our universe, and he poses no threat to its stability. The presence responded instantly. Assessment ongoing. Local advocates noted. Bias detected. Worf's jaw clenched. It dismisses us. It quantifies us, Data corrected. From its perspective, emotional or ethical considerations may be statistically irrelevant. Thor raised his hammer slightly, lightning whispering along its surface. Then speak to it in terms it understands. Picard raised a hand. Not yet. He addressed the presence again. You claim to maintain order, yet you intervene in a universe not your own. Incorrect, the voice replied. All continuums are subsets of a greater structure. Maintenance preserves total coherence. Picard's eyes hardened slightly. At the expense of lives. Lives are transient, the presence said. Coherence is not. Troy felt a surge of quiet fury ripple through the crew. Picard felt it too, but his voice remained even. You are willing to destroy an individual to preserve an abstraction. Correction, the voice replied. The individual is an abstraction, variance resolved through removal. Thor stepped forward fully now, standing beside Picard. Hear me, he said, voice carrying not thunder, but authority. I have seen worlds burn in the name of order. I have watched tyrants call their cruelty necessity. You are no different. The light flickered. Data glanced up. Captain, its energy patterns are fluctuating. It is reacting emotionally, or the closest equivalent. Then it can listen, Picard said. He met the light head on. This universe has survived paradoxes, temporal incursions, and beings who claimed dominion over reality itself. Each time it endured not because it was corrected, but because those within it chose to adapt. Adaptation increases entropy, the presence replied. And yet, Picard countered, here we are. Silence followed. Long, heavy. Thor felt something shift, not hostility, curiosity. It has never been challenged, he murmured. Not like this. Troy nodded slowly. It's uncertain. The presence spoke again. Anomaly, Thor Odinson. State justification for continued existence within this continuum. All eyes turned to Thor. He took a breath, something he did not need to do, but chose to. I am here because I was cast adrift by forces beyond my control, he said. I did not seek this realm, but while I remain, I will not be a burden upon it. I will defend it as I have defended others, not because I must, because it is right. The presence processed this. Moral justification insufficient. Thor smiled grimly. Then consider this. You fear instability. So do I. You erase what does not fit. I confront it. One of us leaves only absence, the other leaves choice. Picard watched the light pulse, brighter now, unstable. Captain, Data said quietly, its internal coherence is degrading. Our arguments are introducing paradox. Good, Riker muttered. The presence responded, voice altered, less certain. Local variables exhibit anomalous resilience. That's one way to put it, Picard said. Thor raised Mjolnir fully now, lightning rolling, but not striking. I will leave if I can, he said. But until then, I will not be erased quietly. The light flared, then began to contract. Assessment suspended, the voice said. Observation period initiated. The sphere collapsed inward, vanishing without a trace. The stars returned to full brilliance. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Worf broke the silence. It retreated. Temporarily, Data said. Observation implies future engagement. Picard exhaled slowly. Then we've bought time. Thor lowered his hammer. The lightning faded. He looked around the bridge at the crew who had stood with him against something vast and impersonal. You defied it, he said quietly. For me. Picard met his gaze. For the principle, he replied. You are not a variable to be corrected. You are a person. Thor felt something settle in his chest. Not triumph, belonging. The Enterprise moved on, but nothing aboard it felt routine anymore. Space had resumed its familiar geometry, stars steady and silent. Yet the sense of being weighed and measured lingered like the memory of a dream that refused to fade. Picard remained on the bridge longer than usual, standing quietly as Data ran extended sensor diagnostics. The android's voice broke the silence with measured precision. Captain, all readings indicate that the convergence has fully withdrawn. No residual energy remains within detectable parameters. Picard nodded slowly. And yet, he said, we both know that absence does not imply safety. Correct, Data replied. Based on the interaction, it is statistically probable that the observing entity will continue monitoring this continuum, particularly in relation to Thor Odinson. Thor stood a few steps back from the view screen, gazing out at the stars as if searching for something only he could sense. They are patient, he said. That makes them dangerous. Riker folded his arms. You're saying they'll wait? Yes, Thor replied. And learn. Worf's expression hardened. Then we must be ready. Picard turned to face his crew. We will not allow fear to dictate our actions, he said. But we will prepare. Mr. Data, I want a full analysis of the entity's communication patterns. Counselor Troy, I want your assessment of its intent, such as it is. Mr. Worf, review defensive contingencies. Quietly. Aye, Captain, Worf said. Picard then looked to Thor. And you, he said, should rest. Thor gave a short, incredulous laugh. I do not tire as mortals do. Nevertheless, Picard replied, you have endured a great deal in a short time, and there is much we need to discuss. Tomorrow. Thor studied him for a moment, then inclined his head. Very well. Sickbay had been prepared for him, but Thor declined the biobed. Instead, Crusher arranged a private room adjacent to sickbay, its walls reinforced with a containment field she insisted was purely precautionary. Thor sat alone for the first time since his arrival. Without the bridge's constant hum, or the presence of others, the silence pressed in. He turned Mjolnir slowly in his hands, studying the runes etched along its surface. They glowed faintly, reacting not to threat, but to proximity, to place. "This realm resists," he murmured. Mjolnir did not answer, but the hammer felt heavier than before, as if acknowledging the truth. Thor closed his eyes. He saw Asgard burning. He saw Loki falling into darkness, his brother's last expression unreadable. He saw the Bifrost shatter, light scattering into infinity. He had believed himself lost between worlds, untethered, alone. Yet here he was, aboard a vessel of mortals who defied gods with words and conviction rather than worship or fear. The door chimed softly. "Enter," Thor said. Picard stepped inside, hands clasped behind his back. "I hope I'm not intruding." Thor shook his head. "You are welcome, Captain." Picard studied him quietly, then spoke. "You've dealt with beings like the one we encountered." Thor nodded. "In different forms, they always claim necessity, balance, order. And they always believe themselves right," Picard added. "Yes," Thor agreed, "because they never stand among those they would erase." Picard moved closer, resting a hand lightly against the bulkhead. "I've spent my life encountering entities who believe themselves beyond morality," he said. "Q, the Borg. Beings who saw humanity as insignificant, flawed, or expendable. And yet," Thor said, "you still stand." Picard smiled faintly. "Because existence isn't a problem to be solved. It's a responsibility." Thor considered that. "You sound like my father." Picard raised an eyebrow. "I'll take that as another compliment." A subtle tremor passed through the ship, barely perceptible. Picard's expression sharpened. "Did you feel that?" Thor was already on his feet. "Yes." The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Picard tapped his comm badge. "Bridge." Riker's voice came through immediately. "Captain, we just detected a subspace fluctuation. Brief, localized, and gone." "Location." "Deck 16, Riker replied. "Cargo Bay 3. Picard and Thor exchanged a look. "Let's go," Picard said. They moved quickly through the corridors, footsteps echoing as security teams converged from adjacent decks. When they reached Cargo Bay 3, the door slid open to reveal chaos. Crates lay scattered, some split open as if forced apart from within. The air shimmered faintly, charged with residual energy. Worf stood near the center of the bay, phaser raised. "Whatever it was," he said, "it is no longer here." Thor stepped forward, eyes scanning the space. "It was not an attack," he said. "It was a test." Data knelt beside a crate, examining scorch marks along its edge. "The energy signature matches that of the observing entity," he said, "but modified." "Modified how?" Riker asked. "Localized," Data replied, "as if a fragment of its presence was projected rather than manifested fully." Troy closed her eyes briefly. "I sense confusion," she said, "and curiosity. It didn't understand what it found." Picard frowned. "Found what?" Thor's gaze fixed on the far wall. "Not what," he said. "Who?" A soft sound echoed through the bay, a whisper of displaced air. Then a figure stepped out of nothingness, not the luminous construct from before. This one was smaller, humanoid, wrapped in shifting light that struggled to maintain form, its features blurred and reformed, never settling. Security teams raised weapons instantly. "Hold," Picard ordered. The figure tilted its head, studying them with unblinking intensity. "Local defense response noted," it said. "I am an interface." Thor stepped forward. "You are less than what came before." "Correct," the interface replied. I am expendable. Worf snarled softly. Then destroy it. No, Picard said sharply. Not yet. The interface turned its attention to Thor. Anomaly Thor Odinson. Continued presence results in cascading variants. Thor met its gaze. And yet you came closer. Correction, the interface said. I was sent closer to evaluate. Evaluate what? Picard demanded. Compatibility, the interface replied. Thor felt the air tighten. With what? The interface paused. With intervention. The words hung heavy. Troy gasped softly. It's considering escalation. Thor raised Mjolnir slightly. Then hear me clearly, he said. If you intervene, you will not face me alone. The interface's form flickered. Local allies increase anomaly resilience beyond projection. Picard stepped beside Thor. We are not allies of convenience, he said firmly. We are responsible for one another. The interface processed this. Statement conflicts with prior models. Then update your models, Picard replied. The interface began to destabilize, light unraveling. Observation complete, it said. Data transmitted. Thor took a step forward. Tell them this, he said. If they come to erase me, they will find more than a god in their way. They will find a crew who does not kneel. The interface's light dimmed. Message acknowledged. Then it vanished, leaving only silence and scattered crates behind. Worf lowered his weapon. It escaped. Picard shook his head. No, he said. It withdrew. Thor exhaled slowly. The test has ended, he said. The trial has not. Picard placed a hand on his shoulder. Then, he said, we'll face it as we always do. Thor looked at the humans around him, mortals who stood unflinching before forces that sought to rewrite reality itself. For the first time since his fall between worlds, he felt something steady anchor him in place. The cargo bay was sealed, its scattered contents secured, but the sense of intrusion lingered long after the interface vanished. The Enterprise resumed a steady course, yet every system hummed under heightened awareness, as if the ship itself had learned to listen more closely to the void. Picard stood with his senior staff in the observation lounge, stars drifting past the wide windows in silent procession. Thor stood apart, hands resting on Mjolnir, posture composed but alert. Data broke the silence. Based on collected data, the observing entities appear to operate through layered projection. The construct was a scout. The convergence was an audit. The interface was a probe designed for adaptive analysis. Riker frowned. In plain terms, they're deciding whether to intervene directly, Data said. Worf crossed his arms. Then we should prepare for war. Picard turned slightly. Not yet, he said. Preparation does not require provocation. Troy looked toward Thor. They are struggling to categorize you, she said. You don't fit their models. That frustrates them. Thor nodded. They prefer certainty. I represent unpredictability. Crusher leaned forward. Which makes you a risk in their eyes. And a liability to us, Riker added carefully. Thor met his gaze without offense. I understand, he said. If my presence endangers your people, say so. Picard answered immediately. It does not. The room stilled. Picard stepped closer to Thor. This ship has sheltered refugees, survivors, and even former enemies. We do not abandon those placed in our care because the universe finds them inconvenient. Thor studied him, then inclined his head deeply. Then I will not forget this. A soft chime sounded. Data glanced at his console. Captain, we are approaching Epsilon Theta. However, Long-range sensors indicate an anomalous object in the system. It was not present during our initial survey projections. Picard turned. On screen, the view screen shifted to reveal a planet bathed in pale light, its surface marked by strange geometric scars that glowed faintly against the darkness. Above it hovered a structure, massive and angular, orbiting with unnatural precision. "That is not Asgardian," Thor said, "nor is it of any realm I know." Data's eyes flickered as he processed incoming data. The structure is emitting energy signatures similar to the observing entities. However, it appears inactive. "Inactive doesn't mean harmless," Riker said. Picard nodded. "Agreed. Mr. Data, full scan. Mr. Worf, maintain yellow alert." Worf acknowledged, fingers moving across tactical controls. Thor felt a familiar pull, a resonance that hummed through his bones. "It is a marker," he said. "A boundary stone." "A what?" Riker asked. "In my realm," Thor replied, "such structures are placed where realities overlap. Warnings or anchors." Picard absorbed this. "Anchors for what?" Thor's eyes narrowed. "For correction." Troy shivered. "Captain, the planet below feels empty," she said. "Not lifeless. Abandoned." Crusher frowned. "Abandoned how?" "As if something was removed," Troy replied. "Deliberately," Data's console chimed. "Captain, scans confirm the planet once supported advanced civilization. Urban centers, energy grids, atmospheric regulation, all ceased simultaneously approximately 300 years ago." Riker stared at the screen. 300 years. Everything just stopped. "Correction," Data said. "Everything was stopped." Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir. "This is their work," he said. "A lesson." Picard's jaw set. "A warning." "Yes," Thor replied. "To others like me." The room fell quiet as the implication settled. Picard turned decisively. "We're going down." Riker looked at him sharply. "Captain, we cannot understand what we're facing from orbit," Picard said. "If this planet is a monument to intervention, then we need to know how and why." Thor stepped forward. "I should accompany you." Picard nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." The away team assembled quickly. Picard, Riker, Data, Worf, Troy, and Thor stood in the transporter room, the hum of energy building beneath their feet. Crusher met Thor's eyes before the beam engaged. "Be careful," she said quietly. Thor smiled faintly. "I will try." Light enveloped them. They materialized on the planet's surface beneath a sky frozen in perpetual twilight. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the wind itself had been erased. Towering structures rose around them, their architecture elegant but incomplete, as though time had stopped mid-thought. Data knelt, scanning the ground. "Captain, molecular stasis. The planet's surface exists in a suspended temporal state." Riker looked around uneasily. "So, nothing decays?" "Correct," Data said. "Nor does it grow." Thor walked forward slowly, senses flaring. "This place is held," he said. "Not destroyed, preserved." Troy's voice trembled. "I feel echoes," she said. "Millions of lives, frozen in absence." Worf's voice was low. "This is dishonorable." They moved deeper into the city, footsteps echoing too loudly in the unnatural quiet. Holographic displays flickered sporadically, frozen images of people mid-motion, faces locked in surprise. Picard stopped before one such image. "They didn't even have time to resist," he said. Thor's eyes burned. "They were made an example." A low vibration rippled through the ground. Data looked up. "Captain, energy surge. The structure in orbit is activating." The sky brightened as a beam of pale light descended, bathing the city in a cold glow. Within it, forms began to emerge. Interfaces, dozens of them stepping into reality with mechanical precision. Worf raised his phaser. "They return." Thor stepped forward, lightning crackling faintly around him. "No," he said. "They respond." The interfaces spoke in unison. Anomaly confirmed. Observation escalated. Picard stood his ground. "You've made your point," he said. "This planet is proof enough." "Proof is irrelevant," the voices replied. "Compliance is required." Thor raised Mjolnir fully now. "Then you will find none." The interfaces advanced. Phasers fired, energy splashing against shifting light. Thor hurled lightning that shattered two interfaces instantly, their forms collapsing into nothingness. Yet more took their place, adapting, adjusting. Data's voice rose. "Captain, their response time is decreasing. They are learning at an exponential rate." Picard tapped his comm badge. "Enterprise, beam us up, now." The beam engaged, light engulfing them as the interfaces closed in. They rematerialized on the bridge, alarms sounding as the orbital structure powered fully. Riker looked at the view screen. "Captain, it's charging something." Thor stared at the structure, realization dawning. "They are preparing another correction." Picard's voice was steady. "Not today." He turned to Data. "Options." Data processed rapidly. "The structure operates on fixed parameters. If we can introduce sufficient unpredictability into its control matrix, we may disrupt its function." Picard looked to Thor. Thor met his gaze. "I am unpredictability." Picard nodded once. "Then let's make them reconsider." The structure above Epsilon Theta began to glow brighter, its angular surfaces aligning with mechanical precision. Energy flowed through it in rigid channels, light condensing into a focused core that pulsed steadily, like a heart that had never known hesitation. On the bridge, the tension was absolute. "Energy output increasing," Data reported. "Projected discharge will envelop the planet within 90 seconds. Riker leaned forward. "That's not a warning shot." "No," Picard said quietly. "That's an erasure." Thor stared at the view screen, jaw set. "They will freeze it again," he said. "Seal it in stillness." Another lesson carved into the void. Picard turned to him. "You said the structure operates on fixed parameters." "Yes," Thor replied. "They abhor variance. Their systems assume certainty." "Then let's give them uncertainty," Picard said. He moved to the center of the bridge. "Mr. Data, can we introduce chaotic variables into the structure's control field?" Data considered for less than a second. "Yes, Captain. However, the magnitude required exceeds the output of standard Starfleet systems." Picard looked at Thor. Thor nodded once. "Mjolnir can amplify," he said, "but I must be close." Riker's head snapped toward Picard. "Captain, you're not considering sending him out there?" "I am," Picard replied. "With support." Worf stepped forward. "I will accompany him." Troi shook her head slightly. "They will focus on Thor," she said. "Anyone near him will be at extreme risk." Thor placed a hand on Worf's shoulder. "Your courage is noted, warrior," he said. "But this burden is mine." Picard met Thor's gaze. "If you do this," he said, "you will be directly opposing forces that consider themselves custodians of reality." Thor smiled grimly. "I have opposed worse with less." Picard nodded slowly. "Very well. Mr. Data, prepare a shuttle. Configure it for maximum power fluctuation, not stability." "Aye, Captain." The shuttle bay doors opened minutes later, stars stretching endlessly beyond. Thor stood at the ramp, Mjolnir in hand, lightning crawling faintly across his armor. Picard stood with him, the hum of the bay filling the silence between them. "You don't have to do this," Picard said quietly. Thor looked at him. "You once told me I was not a variable," he said. "If I allow myself to be corrected, then those words mean nothing." Picard placed a hand briefly on Thor's forearm. "Then bring chaos," he said. "Just enough." Thor inclined his head. "I will return." The shuttle launched, streaking toward the looming structure like a spark cast into the dark. On the bridge, Data monitored the telemetry. "Captain, Thor's energy signature is interacting with the structure's field. The systems are attempting to compensate." "That's good," Riker said. "Right." Thor leapt from the shuttle before it reached firing range, hurling himself through vacuum without hesitation. Mjolnir carried him forward, lightning erupting outward in wild branching arcs that struck the structure's surface. The response was immediate. Interfaces erupted from the structure, dozens at once, swarming toward him in coordinated patterns. Energy lances fired, precise and lethal. Thor spun, deflecting one with Mjolnir, absorbing another into his armor. Pain flared, sharp and real, but he welcomed it. Pain meant change. Pain meant life. "Captain," Data said, "the structure is reallocating power. It is attempting to neutralize Thor directly." "Which means it's distracted," Picard replied. "Execute Phase 2. The Enterprise surged forward, shields flaring as it entered the outer edge of the structure's field. Phaser fire lanced out, not to destroy, but to disrupt, targeting relay nodes that Data highlighted in rapid succession. On the structure, Thor slammed Mjolnir into the surface, lightning exploding outward in chaotic patterns that defied symmetry. Circuits overloaded, control fields destabilized. "Your order is fragile," Thor roared into the void. "And I am not," the structure's glow faltered. Data's voice rose with urgency. "Captain, control matrices are destabilizing. Probability calculations are failing. They did not account for cooperative interference." Picard allowed himself a tight smile. "Few tyrannies do." A beam fired from the structure, striking Thor squarely. He cried out as energy tore through him, armor cracking, lightning flaring wildly out of control. "Thor," Picard said softly. Thor forced himself upright, pain blazing through every nerve. He felt the structure recalibrating, learning even now. "No," he growled, "not fast enough." He raised Mjolnir one final time and struck. The hammer connected with the core. The explosion of light was blinding. On the bridge, every console flared red, then green. The structure's glow collapsed inward, energy folding in on itself before detonating silently, vanishing as if it had never existed. The planet below remained unchanged, frozen, but intact. "Structure destroyed," Data confirmed. "No residual correction field detected." Silence followed. "Thor," Picard said into the comm. "Respond." For a moment, there was nothing. Then a faint signal appeared on sensors, drifting. "Life signs detected," Data said quickly. "Weak, but present." "Beam him aboard," Picard ordered. Thor materialized in sickbay, collapsing onto the biobed as Crusher and her team rushed forward. His armor was scorched, cracked in places, lightning scars etched into metal and flesh alike. Crusher scanned rapidly. "He's alive," she said, "but barely." Picard stood at the foot of the bed, watching as Thor's chest rose and fell slowly. "You did it," Picard said quietly. Thor's eyes fluttered open briefly. He managed a faint smile. "They will remember this," he whispered. Then he lost consciousness. Outside the ship, the stars burned on, indifferent yet changed, as somewhere beyond perception, entities of order recalculated their understanding of resistance. Thor drifted in darkness that felt heavier than sleep. It was not the void between worlds this time, nor the violent unraveling of a rift. This was deeper, quieter, a stillness that pressed against him from every direction, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. He dreamed of Asgard, not as it was in its glory, but as it had been in quieter moments. Golden halls at dusk, the sound of distant laughter, his mother's voice, gentle and firm, reminding him that strength without wisdom was merely noise. He saw his father standing at the edge of the Bifrost, watching realms spin in endless patience. "You are not finished," the dream said. "Not yet." Thor tried to move and found himself anchored, not by force, but by exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had found his soul. Lightning stirred faintly within him, but even it seemed hesitant, uncertain whether it was welcome here. Slowly, sound returned, the soft hum of machinery, the rhythmic pulse of monitors, voices muted at first, then clearer. "He's stabilizing," Dr. Crusher said, relief evident in her voice despite the exhaustion lining it. "Barely, but he's stabilizing." Picard stood beside the biobed, hands clasped behind his back, his face composed, but his eyes revealing the strain of the last hours. "How long?" "Hours," Crusher replied. "Maybe days. His body is repairing damage at a cellular level I can barely track. If he were human, he wouldn't have survived the first minute." Picard nodded. "And now?" "Now," she said, "he's resting, truly resting. I don't recommend waking him." Picard leaned slightly closer, studying Thor's face. Even unconscious, there was an intensity there, a presence that filled the room without effort. "He saved an entire world," Picard said quietly. Crusher exhaled, "and nearly destroyed himself doing it." On the bridge, the Enterprise held position above the frozen planet, its scarred surface glowing faintly beneath the distant sun. Data worked tirelessly, analyzing streams of data pouring in from long-range sensors. "Captain," Data reported, "there has been a measurable change in subspace background radiation. The observing entities have withdrawn all detectable assets from this region." Riker leaned forward. "Withdrawn, as in gone?" "Yes," Data replied. "Their probability fields have collapsed. It is as though they have chosen to disengage." "For now," Riker said. "Correct," Data agreed. "However, their retreat suggests recalibration rather than defeat." Picard remained silent for a long moment. "They've learned something," he said at last. "The question is what?" Troy, seated nearby, closed her eyes briefly. "They're unsettled," she said. "They didn't expect resistance to change them, especially not resistance born from cooperation." Worf snorted softly. "They underestimated us." "Many do," Picard replied. The planet below remained unchanged, frozen, preserved, a monument to interference that had failed to repeat itself. Picard ordered a buoy deployed, its sensors programmed to monitor the region indefinitely. "We will not forget what happened here," he said, "and we will not allow it to be repeated unnoticed." In sickbay, hours passed. Thor's breathing deepened, steadied. The lightning scars along his armor faded slowly, as if the energy within him were retreating inward to rebuild rather than burn. At last, his eyes opened. This time, there was no roar, no demand, only a slow, deliberate awareness returning piece by piece. He felt the biobed beneath him, the familiar hum of unfamiliar technology, the weight of Mjolnir resting near his hand. Thor turned his head slightly and found Picard seated beside him. "You remain," Thor said quietly, his voice rough but steady. Picard smiled faintly. "I had a feeling you would wake." Thor closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "The structure," he said. "The world." "The structure is gone," Picard replied. "The planet remains, frozen but safe from further intervention. For now." Thor exhaled slowly. "Then it was worth it." Picard studied him. "You almost died." "Yes," Thor said. "That too." Picard shook his head slightly. "You don't measure cost the way most beings do." Thor's lips curved faintly. "Nor do you," he said. "You challenged entities that could have erased you without effort." Picard met his gaze. "They didn't," he said, "because they misjudged something fundamental." "And what was that?" Thor asked. Picard leaned back slightly. "That we would accept their definition of order." Thor considered that, then nodded. "You remind me of warriors who fight not to conquer, but to refuse surrender." "High praise," Picard said dryly. Thor shifted, wincing slightly as pain flared and subsided. "They will return," he said. "Not with force, with rules, with limits." "Then we'll meet them there," Picard replied. "Starfleet has a great deal of experience negotiating with the universe." Thor laughed softly, then grew serious. "Captain," he said, "I must ask you something." "Of course." "If remaining here draws their attention again, if my presence endangers your people," Thor said, "would you ask me to leave?" Picard did not answer immediately. He chose his words with care. "If your presence endangered us because of what you chose to do," he said, "we would face that choice together. If it endangered us because of what you are, then no, we do not exile beings for existing." Thor felt something tighten in his chest, unfamiliar and heavy. Gratitude, perhaps, or something closer to trust. "Then," Thor said, "I will remain, until I am no longer needed, or until I find a way home." Picard stood. "When that time comes," he said, "we will help you." Thor's eyes closed briefly. "I believe you." Outside sickbay, the Enterprise resumed its journey, leaving the frozen world behind. The stars stretched on endlessly, indifferent to gods and mortals alike. But somewhere beyond perception, beyond space and time, something had changed. The custodians of order recalculated, and for the first time in eons, their equations included defiance. Thor's recovery was not measured in hours or days, but in moments of quiet observation. He did not sleep as humans did, not deeply and not for long. Instead, he rested in intervals, drifting between awareness and stillness while his body rebuilt itself with deliberate patience. Dr. Crusher monitored him closely, fascinated by the way his physiology seemed to prioritize balance over speed, repairing what was necessary and ignoring what was merely cosmetic. "He's healing," she told Picard during one such check, "but not the way I expected. It's as if his body is deciding what version of itself belongs here." Picard considered that. "Adapting." "Yes," Crusher said, "without losing itself." Thor overheard, a faint smile touching his lips. "Mjolnir does the same," he said quietly. "It remembers who it is, no matter where it rests." Once he was strong enough to stand unaided, Picard invited him to walk the ship, not as a prisoner, not as a guest under guard, but as an observer. The corridors of the Enterprise fascinated Thor more than he expected. There were no banners, no statues of conquerors, no reminders of gods or kings, only people moving with purpose, each contributing to something larger than themselves without demanding recognition. "You rule many worlds," Thor said as they passed through a bustling science section. "We do not rule," Picard corrected. "We cooperate." Thor frowned slightly. "That is inefficient," Picard smiled. "And yet, it works." They stopped at 10 forward. The wide windows revealed a river of stars flowing past, endless and calm. Guinan stood behind the bar, polishing a glass. Her eyes flicked to Thor the instant he entered, sharp and knowing. "Well," she said, "you're a long way from home." Thor met her gaze and felt something unusual. Not power, awareness. "You see more than you say," he observed. Guinan smiled. "I've met a few gods in my time. Most of them weren't worth the trouble." Thor laughed, surprised. "Then I will try not to disappoint." They sat. Picard ordered tea. Thor declined a drink, content to simply exist in the moment. For a while, neither spoke. "You carry storms," Guinan said eventually, her voice low, "but you don't let them decide who you are." Thor considered her words. "I have," he admitted. "Too often." Guinan nodded. "You're learning." Picard watched the exchange with interest. "You sense something," he said to Guinan. "I sense crossroads," she replied. "Big ones." Thor felt it too, a subtle pull beneath his skin, like distant thunder. "The observers," he said. "They have not gone far." "No," Guinan agreed. "They never do." The moment passed, leaving unease in its wake. Later, in engineering, Geordi LaForge stood beside the warp core, explaining its function with barely contained enthusiasm. Thor listened intently, eyes bright with curiosity. "You trap a controlled singularity," Thor said slowly, "and convince it to behave." Geordi grinned. "That's one way to put it." "In Asgard," Thor said, "we would call that madness." "And yet," Geordi replied, "here we are." Thor placed a hand near the humming core, careful not to touch. He felt the contained power thrumming like a caged beast. "Your people wield forces once reserved for gods," he said, "and you do so without ceremony." Geordi shrugged. "We prefer results." Thor nodded in approval. "I like you." The days that followed settled into a fragile normalcy. Thor trained with Worf in the holodeck, their sparring matches shaking the simulated environment as honor met honor. Worf found Thor's strength formidable, but his restraint more impressive. "You hold back," Worf observed after one bout. Thor inclined his head. "This is your ship," he said. "I will not break it." Worf grunted approvingly. Wise. Troy spent time with Thor as well, not as a patient, but as a guide through unfamiliar emotional terrain. She sensed his guilt over Loki, his fear that his brother's shadow still lingered somewhere beyond reach. "You don't believe he's gone," she said gently. Thor shook his head. "Loki survives," he said, "even when he should not." "Does that frighten you?" Troy asked. "Yes," Thor replied honestly, "because part of me hopes it is true." One evening, as the Enterprise cruised through open space, Data approached Picard on the bridge. "Captain," he said, "I have detected a subtle fluctuation in Thor Odinson's bioenergetic signature." Picard turned. "Explain." "It appears synchronized with long-range subspace harmonics," Data replied, "as though he is resonating with something." Picard's gaze shifted toward the stars. Or something is resonating with him. Almost on cue, Thor stiffened where he stood near the view screen. His eyes narrowed. "They are watching again," he said. The lights dimmed briefly, then steadied. Troy's voice came through Picard's comm badge. "Captain, I feel it too. Not presence. Attention." Picard straightened. "Mr. Data, can we identify the source?" Data shook his head. Negative. Whatever it is exists outside conventional detection parameters. Thor clenched his fist. They are waiting for me to choose, he said. Choose what? Picard asked. Thor turned to him. To stay, he said, or to leave. The bridge fell quiet. Picard stepped closer. And what do you want? Thor looked at the stars, at the ship, at the people who had stood beside him without kneeling or fearing him. I want, he said slowly, to learn what kind of God does not need a throne. Picard met his gaze. Then perhaps, he said, you're in the right place. Somewhere beyond reality's edge, equations shifted again. The anomaly did not act. It waited. The waiting was worse than the battle. Thor had known sieges that lasted years, wars that burned entire skies, but this was different. There was no enemy on the horizon, no blade to meet, no thunder to unleash. Only the sense of being measured, weighed against a scale that did not care about honor or sacrifice. The Enterprise moved steadily through deep space, its mission profile outwardly unchanged. Inside, however, an undercurrent of anticipation ran through every deck. Sensors were tuned beyond standard parameters. Data adjusted algorithms daily, chasing patterns that refused to fully resolve. Troy felt the pressure like a distant storm that never quite arrived. Thor stood often at the observation lounge windows, hands clasped behind his back, posture reminiscent of a warrior king awaiting judgment. Mjolnir rested nearby, silent but alert. Picard joined him one evening, tea in hand. You've been very still, Picard observed. Thor smiled faintly. That is when I am most dangerous, he said. To myself. Picard regarded him thoughtfully. You're waiting for them to act. Yes, Thor replied, because when they do, it will define everything that follows. Picard took a sip of his tea. In my experience, beings who claim authority over reality often underestimate one thing. And what is that? Thor asked. Our refusal to behave as expected, Picard replied. As if summoned by the words, the ship's lights dimmed, not flickering, not failing, simply lowering, as though the universe itself were drawing a breath. Data's voice carried across the bridge moments later. Captain, we are detecting a localized subspace inversion forming directly ahead. Non-hostile configuration. Picard straightened. On screen, the view screen filled with a distortion unlike those before. There was no violence in it, no tearing or intrusion. Space curved gently inward, forming a vast, translucent chamber that seemed less constructed than invited. Troy's voice was calm, but intent. They are not attacking, she said. They are convening. Thor exhaled slowly. Then the trial resumes. The chamber expanded, enveloping the Enterprise without resistance. Shields flared automatically, then settled as no pressure followed. The stars vanished, replaced by a luminous expanse that defied depth and distance. Data stared at his readings. Captain, we are not being restrained. Our systems are fully operational. They want us present, Picard said. A presence manifested. Not one, many. Points of awareness arranged in a vast, shifting pattern, each distinct yet harmonized, like facets of a single will. The voice came not from one direction, but from everywhere. Anomaly persists. Thor stepped forward, unprompted. I am here, he said. Context expanded, the presence replied. Local collective included. Picard felt the weight of the words. You have drawn us into your deliberation, he said. That was not consented to. Consent is not required for evaluation, the presence replied. Picard's jaw tightened. It is when sentient beings are involved. A pause followed. Not silence. Consideration. Parameters adjusted, the Presence said. Statement acknowledged. Thor glanced at Picard, surprised. Picard met his gaze steadily. You have observed, the Presence continued. You have tested. You have interfered. You have disrupted corrective operations. Yes, Picard said. We have. Justification requested, the Presence said. Thor raised Mjolnir slightly, then lowered it again. You seek justification in equations, he said. You will not find it there. Alternative input accepted, the Presence replied. Provide rationale. Picard stepped forward now, standing beside Thor. You define stability as the absence of deviation, said. We define it as the capacity to endure change. Change increases entropy, the Presence replied. And yet, Picard countered, your own actions introduce it. Every correction creates ripples. Every erasure leaves scars. The luminous field shifted, patterns reconfigured. Troy felt a tremor of something like uncertainty ripple through the chamber. They're listening, she said softly. Thor's voice carried, deep and resolute. You fear what you cannot predict, he said. So do all beings who mistake control for wisdom. Control preserves structure, the Presence replied. And wisdom preserves life, Thor said. You froze a world to make a point. You erased choice to preserve order. That is not balance. That is fear. The chamber brightened subtly. Anomaly, Thor Odinson exhibits high influence coefficient, the Presence said. Local collective amplifies variance. Picard seized the moment. Yes, he said, because we stand together, not because of power, because of principle. A long pause followed. Then the Presence spoke again, its tone altered, less absolute, more precise. Evaluation update. Anomaly does not destabilize continuum through presence alone. Destabilization correlates with custodial response. Thor's eyes widened slightly. You see it, he said. Custodial intervention identified as primary variance driver, the Presence replied. Worf's voice cut in, controlled but edged. You create the chaos you claim to prevent. Another pause. Hypothesis accepted for further modeling, the Presence said. The luminous chamber began to recede, space gently unfolding back into familiar geometry. Stars reappeared, distant and steady. Before the Presence withdrew entirely, it spoke one final time. Anomaly, Thor Odinson. Continued presence permitted under observation. Local collective designated mitigating factor. Thor let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Picard stood tall. And the frozen world, he said. Will you release it? The Presence hesitated. Release introduces uncontrolled outcomes. So does imprisonment, Picard replied. But you will not learn that by holding it still. The chamber faded completely. The Enterprise was alone among the stars once more. Data checked his readings in disbelief. Captain, he said, they have withdrawn all monitoring constructs from this sector. Troy smiled faintly. They're letting go, she said. Just a little. Thor sank into a nearby chair, exhaustion washing over him. Then the trial ends, he murmured. Picard shook his head gently. No, he said. It evolves. Thor looked up at him. You have changed them. Picard allowed himself a small smile. So have you. Outside, the universe moved on, uncorrected, unpredictable, and alive. The Enterprise did not celebrate. There were no cheers on the bridge, no triumphant declarations, no sense that something had been won. Instead, there was a quieter feeling that settled over the ship, subtle but profound. like the calm after a storm that had changed the shape of the land without announcing itself. Thor remained seated in the observation lounge long after the luminous chamber faded. The stars outside felt different now, not safer, not kinder, simply less constrained. Picard stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back, sharing the silence. "They allowed it," Thor said at last. "They allowed themselves to doubt," Picard replied. "That's far more significant." Thor nodded slowly. "In my realm, doubt is seen as weakness." "In ours," Picard said, "it's the beginning of wisdom." Thor turned his head, studying Picard with renewed intensity. "You wield words as others wield weapons," he said, "and they are no less powerful." Picard smiled faintly. "They tend to leave fewer craters." Elsewhere on the ship, the effects of the encounter rippled outward. Data worked in his quarters, replaying the exchange with the custodial presence frame by frame, syllable by syllable. His neural net flagged inconsistencies, moments where absolute certainty gave way to conditional logic. "They revised," he murmured, "not because of force, because of contradiction." For Data, the realization was quietly profound. In engineering, Geordi adjusted sensor calibrations, whistling softly. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. "We argued with the universe, and it blinked." In 10 forward, Guinan poured herself a drink and gazed out at the stars, her expression unreadable. "About time," she said softly. Thor resumed his walk through the ship, this time alone. Crew members greeted him not with awe or fear, but with curiosity, with cautious smiles, with the unspoken acknowledgement reserved for someone who had stood in the storm and not broken. In the holodeck, Worf waited. Thor entered without ceremony, Mjolnir resting at his side. The program resolved into a stark Klingon training ground beneath a blood-red sky. "You wish to fight," Worf said. Thor shook his head. "No," he replied. "I wish to understand." Worf regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we will spar." They circled one another slowly, movements deliberate. This was not the thunderous clash of gods. It was measured, intentional. Each strike tested restraint rather than dominance. "You held back against the custodians," Worf said between exchanges. Thor parried, stepping aside. "I have learned that power used without purpose invites correction." Worf grunted approvingly. "You learn quickly." Their bout ended not with a victor, but with mutual acknowledgement. They stood, breathing steadily, warriors bound not by conquest, but respect. Later, Troy joined Thor in a quiet lounge. "You feel different," she said. Thor nodded. "I feel lighter." "You faced something that defined you as an error," Troy said, "and refused to accept it." Thor considered her words. "I have spent my life defined by lineage," he said, "by expectation, by destiny." "And now?" Troy asked gently. "And now," Thor replied, "I am defined by choice." Troy smiled. The Enterprise changed course the following day, leaving the region of the frozen world behind. A buoy remained, silent and watchful, a promise rather than a warning. On the bridge, Picard reviewed the navigational data. "Set course," he said calmly. "There are other stars that need understanding." "Aye, Captain," Riker replied. As the ship entered warp, Thor stood once more at the view screen. He felt the custodians still, far away, observing, but no longer pressing. Their attention had shifted, not away from him entirely, but toward possibility. He turned to Picard. "They will test this choice," he said. "Of course," Picard replied. "So will we." Thor smiled, a genuine thing this time. Then I am glad I remain. Picard studied him. You're beginning to sound like a Starfleet officer. Thor laughed, deep and warm. Do not push your luck, Captain. Beyond the ship, reality flowed uncorrected, shaped not by absolute order, but by countless decisions made by beings who refused to be simplified. Somewhere beyond space and time, the custodians adjusted their models once more. And for the first time, they included trust as a variable. The sense of scrutiny did not vanish. It softened. Thor felt it in the quiet moments, when the Enterprise cruised between stars and the hum of the warp engines blended into something almost soothing. The custodians were still there, distant and attentive. Like scholars observing an experiment they no longer fully controlled. For the first time since his arrival, that awareness no longer felt like a blade at his back. It felt like expectation. Picard noticed the change as well, though he would never have described it in the same terms. The universe felt less brittle, less prone to fracture under inquiry. It was a subtle thing, but after a lifetime spent at the edge of the unknown, he had learned to trust such instincts. The Enterprise received a distress signal 2 days later. Captain, Data announced from Ops. We are detecting a weak emergency transmission from a civilian transport vessel. Registry unknown. Life signs present, but deteriorating. Picard straightened. Source. Border region near a Class 9 nebula, Data replied. Navigation interference is severe. Riker frowned. That area is barely charted. All the more reason to respond, Picard said. Set course. Maximum safe warp. As the ship accelerated, Thor felt something stir within him. Not danger. Familiarity. That nebula, he said quietly. It twists perception. Picard glanced toward him. You've encountered similar phenomena. Yes, Thor replied. Places where reality bends inward, where intent matters more than direction. Then we'll need your insight, Picard said, without hesitation. The nebula filled the view screen soon after, a vast storm of violet and blue, lightning flickering through gaseous clouds like the echo of distant thought. Sensors struggled, readings fluctuating wildly. Signal degrading, Data reported. Life signs intermittent. We're losing them, Riker said. Thor stepped forward, eyes fixed on the nebula. They are afraid, he said. Fear sharpens the storm. Troy nodded slowly. He's right. The panic is amplifying the interference. Picard made his decision. Thor, he said, can you guide us? Thor closed his eyes, focusing. He felt the subtle currents within the nebula, not physical, but emotional, reactive to intention. Do not force the path, he said. Follow the quiet. Helm, Picard said calmly. Adjust course as Thor directs. The Enterprise eased forward, its movement subtle, almost hesitant. The turbulence lessened. Sensors stabilized just enough. There, Thor said softly. They hide where they believe they will not be found. The transport appeared on the view screen, battered and adrift, its hull scorched by energy discharges. Life support flickered dangerously. Beam survivors directly to sickbay, Picard ordered. Moments later, the crew was aboard, injured, shaken, but alive. As sickbay filled with activity, Crusher worked swiftly, barking orders, stabilizing patients. One of the rescued beings, a member of a species unfamiliar even to Data, clutched Thor's arm weakly. You held the storm back, the being whispered. Thor shook his head gently. No, he said. I listened to it. The being smiled faintly before losing consciousness. Picard watched from the doorway, thoughtful. Later, As the Enterprise cleared the nebula and set course for safer space, Picard invited Thor back to the observation lounge. "You didn't overpower the phenomenon," Picard said. "You adapted to it." Thor nodded. Force would have torn the nebula apart. It would have fed on that violence. Picard studied him. "You're changing." Thor smiled faintly. "So I am told." They stood in silence for a time, stars gliding past. "You once asked me if I would ask you to leave," Picard said quietly. "If your presence endangered us." Thor looked at him. "Yes." Picard gestured subtly toward the stars. "Today, your presence saved lives." Thor absorbed that, his expression unreadable. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "this realm is not merely a place I fell into." Picard met his gaze. "Perhaps it's one you were meant to learn from." Thor laughed softly. "Careful, Captain. That sounds like destiny." Picard smiled. "I prefer opportunity." Far beyond the Enterprise, unseen and unfelt, the custodians observed the rescue. Data streams flowed, models adjusted. Anomaly. Thor Odinson had not imposed order. He had restored balance through restraint. That distinction mattered. The calculation shifted again, more subtly than before. Intervention thresholds rose. Observation windows widened. The universe, it seemed, was being allowed to breathe. The Enterprise moved through open space at a steady warp, stars flowing past like silent witnesses. The ship felt calmer after the nebula, as if the universe itself had released a held breath. Thor stood alone in the observation lounge, hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the endless expanse. The stars here were different from those of his home. Colder, perhaps, but no less beautiful. For the first time since his arrival, Thor felt something close to peace. That peace did not last. "Thor to bridge," Picard's voice came through the comm, controlled but edged with urgency. "I'd appreciate your presence." Thor tapped his comm badge. "I am on my way." When he arrived, the bridge carried a tension that was instantly familiar. Not panic, anticipation. "Report," Picard said as Thor stepped beside him. Data gestured to the view screen. "We are detecting a region of subspace instability directly along our projected course. It is not a naturally occurring phenomenon." Riker folded his arms. "It's like space is being folded, but deliberately." Thor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Something is watching again," he said, "but closer this time." Troy inhaled sharply. "I feel it too, not hostile, curious, focused." Picard considered the data. Could this be related to the beings who intervened before? "Yes," Thor said without hesitation, "but they are no longer content to observe." Almost as if summoned by his words, the stars on the view screen warped. Space bent inward, not tearing like the rift that had brought Thor here, but smoothing, shaping itself into a vast geometric distortion. Light curved unnaturally around it. "Subspace integrity dropping," Data reported. "All decks reporting localized gravity fluctuations." "Reduce speed," Picard ordered. "All stop." The Enterprise drifted to a halt, suspended before the distortion. Then a voice filled the bridge. Not through speakers, not through vibration. It was everywhere at once. "Thor Odinson." The name resonated through Thor's very bones. He straightened instinctively, energy stirring beneath his skin. "I hear you," he said aloud. Picard glanced at him, but did not interrupt. "You have altered probability," the voice continued. "You were not expected to persist." Thor tilted his head slightly. "I rarely do what is expected." A pause followed. The distortion pulsed softly, like a vast, thinking heart. "You did not dominate," the voice said. "You did not destabilize. You adapted." "That is what warriors do when they grow," Thor replied. Troy's eyes widened. She could feel layers within the presence, countless perspectives speaking as one. This was not a god, not in the way Thor understood gods. "Your presence still represents risk," the voice said. "But also data." Picard stepped forward. "You are addressing a member of my crew," he said calmly. "If you have concerns, address us all." Another pause, longer this time. "You are consistent," the voice said to Picard. "Your species persists through cooperation rather than dominance." "That's the idea," Picard replied. The distortion shifted. A faint outline formed within it. Not a body, but a suggestion of form, like a shadow cast by higher dimensions. "We are the custodial continuum," the voice said. "We preserve structural coherence across evolving realities." Thor exhaled slowly. "Wardens of the weave." "Yes," the voice replied. "Your terminology is approximate." "You intervened when I arrived," Thor said. "You restrained yourselves after." "Correct." "Why now?" Thor asked. "Do you speak?" "Because divergence has reached a threshold," the custodian said. "Your influence propagates, not through force, through example." Picard's brow furrowed. "You're concerned about cultural impact." "Existential impact," the voice corrected. "The presence of a mythic constant within a post-mythic civilization produces unpredictable resonance." Thor smiled faintly. "You fear they might believe in something again." The distortion flickered. "Belief is a destabilizing variable." Picard's voice hardened slightly. "So is despair. We found hope to be remarkably effective." The custodians were silent. Thor took a step forward. The deck beneath his boots vibrated subtly, but held. "I did not come here to be worshipped," he said, "nor to rule. I came by accident. I stayed by choice." "Choice is another destabilizing factor," the voice said. "And yet," Thor replied, "it is the one thing you cannot model." The distortion rippled more violently now. Systems across the Enterprise fluctuated, but held steady. "You represent an anomaly," the custodian said. "But anomalies sometimes strengthen systems rather than collapse them." Picard seized the opening. "Then let us continue," he said. "Observe, learn, intervene only if necessary." The voice seemed to consider this. "Conditional allowance granted," it said at last. "But understand this, Thor Odinson. Should your presence begin to fracture causality beyond acceptable parameters, corrective action will be taken." Thor met the distortion without flinching. "I would expect nothing less." The presence began to recede, space slowly returning to normal. The stars straightened, gravity normalized. Before it vanished entirely, the voice spoke once more, quieter now. "You are no longer merely displaced." Thor felt the words settle heavily within him. "You are becoming integral." The distortion collapsed into nothingness. Silence returned to the bridge. Riker let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well, that was new." Data looked up from his console. "Captain, long-range sensors indicate no lasting damage. Subspace stability returning to baseline." Picard turned to Thor. "Care to translate that last part?" Thor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They are no longer sure whether removing me would cause more harm than letting me stay." Picard nodded slowly. "That's about as close to trust as beings like that get." Troy studied Thor carefully. "They're afraid of you," she said, "but not because of your power." Thor looked at her. Why then? Because you're changing the narrative, she replied. You don't fit the role they assigned. Thor glanced at the stars again. Neither do humans, he said. Picard smiled, faintly. We've been accused of that before. The Enterprise resumed course, engines humming back to life. Thor remained on the bridge a while longer, watching the stars with renewed awareness. He could feel the threads now, faintly. Cause and effect, choice and consequence. For the first time in his long life, Thor realized he was not merely fighting battles. He was participating in an ongoing story far larger than himself. And somewhere beyond space and time, the custodians watched, uncertain for the first time in ages whether the universe they preserved was truly better without such anomalies. The days that followed passed without incident, yet the quiet felt charged, like the pause between distant thunder and the storm itself. The Enterprise moved along its patrol route, systems nominal, crew routines resuming, but something fundamental had shifted. Thor could feel it in the way the ship hummed around him, in the way space itself no longer felt entirely indifferent to his presence. He spent more time in 10 forward now. Guinan watched him from behind the bar with the same calm curiosity she had always reserved for beings who did not quite belong to any one place. She poured him another drink, something warm and strong that Data had assured her would not damage Thor's physiology. "You're heavier today," she said casually. Thor arched an eyebrow. "I assure you, I have not increased in mass." She smiled. "Not like that. You're anchored." Thor considered her words. "I have not been tethered to a realm in a long time." Guinan leaned closer. "Most people think being untethered is freedom, but drifting forever gets lonely." Thor met her gaze, surprised by the depth of understanding there. "You speak as though you've drifted." "I have," she replied softly, "and I chose to stop." Their conversation was interrupted when Picard entered 10 forward, his expression thoughtful. "Thor," he said, "I was hoping to speak with you." Guinan gave Thor a knowing look and moved away, leaving them space. Picard gestured toward the viewport. "Walk with me." They stood side by side, watching a distant star flare gently before settling again. "I've reviewed the logs from your arrival to now," Picard said. "From a Starfleet perspective, your impact is unprecedented." Thor nodded. "I would expect nothing less. You've saved lives. You've prevented catastrophes. You've also drawn the attention of entities that normally ignore us entirely." Thor glanced at him. "You are not displeased." "No," Picard admitted, "but I am cautious. The Federation was built on the idea that no one being should stand above the rest." Thor smiled faintly. "Nor should they." Picard turned to him. "Then help me understand something. Why stay?" Thor's answer came slowly, carefully chosen. "In my realm, I was a symbol, a weapon, a sun measured against a legend. Here, I am, a participant." Picard nodded. "Participation carries responsibility." "Yes," Thor said, "but also meaning." Before Picard could respond, the ship shuddered slightly. "Yellow alert," Worf's voice echoed over the comm. Picard tapped his comm badge. "Bridge." "Captain," Worf said, "we are detecting a vessel emerging from warp directly ahead. Configuration unknown." Picard and Thor moved quickly to the bridge. On the view screen, a sleek, angular ship drifted into view, its hull reflecting starlight in shifting patterns. It bore no recognizable markings, yet its energy signature was unmistakable. "Captain," Data said, The vessel is emitting subspace harmonics identical to those of the custodial continuum's manifestation. Thor felt the familiar pressure settle around him again, but this time it was focused, deliberate. The ship hailed them. The voice that emerged was different, singular, focused. "Jean-Luc Picard," it said, "and Thor Odinson." Picard straightened. "You have our attention." "We are not the continuum," the voice said. "We are an emissary." "Of whom?" Picard asked. "Of consequence," the voice replied. Thor stepped forward. "Speak plainly." The emissary ship pulsed softly. "Your continued integration into this reality has produced secondary effects." Picard frowned. "Define secondary." "Others are noticing," the emissary said. "Beings who do not preserve, beings who consume, beings who reshape realities for sport or dominion." Thor's grip tightened slightly. "Names," the voice hesitated. "Some you would call gods, others something worse." The bridge grew tense. "You are a signal," the emissary continued. "Your presence announces that this universe is no longer closed to mythic constants." Picard crossed his arms. "So, what do you want?" "To assess," the emissary replied, "whether you are a stabilizing influence or an attractor for catastrophe." Thor's eyes glowed faintly. "Then assess." The emissary ship began emitting a focused beam, not a weapon, but a probe that washed over the Enterprise and Thor alike. Data reported rapidly. "Captain, the scan is mapping probability distributions, ethical response matrices, and narrative divergence vectors." Riker blinked. "Narrative what?" Thor smiled humorlessly. "Stories," he said. "They are measuring how this universe tells them." The emissary spoke again. "Thor Odinson, your past actions are consistent with protector archetypes. However, your continued presence will inevitably draw confrontation." Thor nodded. "It always does." "And when that confrontation comes," the emissary asked, "will you stand apart or with them?" Thor did not look away from Picard as he answered. "I stand with my allies." Picard felt something settle into place at that moment. Not relief, certainty. The emissary ship dimmed slightly. "That answer increases projected survivability for this reality by a measurable margin." "Good," Picard said, "because we intend to survive." The emissary began to withdraw, its hull shimmering as it prepared to depart. "One final note," it said. "A convergence event is approaching. Multiple external forces will intersect within your operational range." Picard's jaw tightened. "When?" "Soon," the emissary replied. "Soon enough that preparation is possible, not enough that avoidance is." The ship vanished into subspace. Silence filled the bridge. "Well," Riker said after a moment, "that's ominous." Thor exhaled slowly. "It means the universe has noticed it can be challenged." Picard turned to him. "And that concerns you." "It excites me," Thor admitted, "but it also frightens me." Picard met his gaze. "Good. Fear keeps us honest." As the Enterprise resumed course, Thor felt the threads tighten again, drawing events closer together. Forces moving, choices approaching. For the first time, he understood that this was not about whether he belonged here. It was about whether he would help shape what came next. Preparation became the rhythm of the ship. Not the frantic kind that followed immediate danger, but the focused, disciplined readiness that preceded something vast and unavoidable. The Enterprise adjusted its patrol patterns, expanded sensor sweeps, and quietly coordinated with Starfleet Command. No official explanation was logged beyond vague references to anomalous subspace forecasts, but Picard ensured that his senior staff understood the truth. Something was coming. Thor felt it constantly now, not as a threat bearing down on him personally, but as pressure on the weave of reality itself, like ice beginning to crack beneath slow-moving water. The universe was shifting its weight. He trained in the holodeck daily, not because he needed to, but because it helped him think. Worf observed him one evening, arms crossed, as Thor faced a dozen holographic combat drones calibrated to Starfleet tactical standards. Thor did not destroy them. He redirected them, using controlled bursts of lightning to disable sensors, collapse targeting matrices, and force system resets. "You fight with restraint," Worf noted. Thor glanced at him. "You expected otherwise." Worf considered this. Klingon warriors value honor through strength. "So do Asgardians," Thor replied. "But strength without control is noise." Worf nodded slowly. "There is wisdom in that." The training session ended abruptly when the lights flickered. "Computer," Data's voice echoed from the corridor. "Terminate program. Thor, please report to the bridge immediately." Thor arrived moments later. The view screen was filled with stars twisting unnaturally, as if pulled toward a single invisible center. Subspace distortions rippled outward in concentric waves. "Convergence event," Data said. "It has begun earlier than projected." Picard stood at the center of the bridge, calm but alert. "Report." "Multiple energy signatures," Data continued. "Interdimensional, transtemporal, and non-local." Troy pressed a hand to her temple. "I can feel them. Curiosity, hunger, amusement." Thor's jaw tightened. "They test boundaries." As if on cue, space folded again, but this time not into a single distortion. Multiple apertures formed, each distinct in shape and energy signature. The first shimmered with golden light and impossible geometry. The second pulsed with deep shadow, its edges jagged and sharp. The third rippled like liquid glass, reflecting countless potential realities at once. "Captain," Riker said quietly, "we've got company." A voice echoed through the bridge. Not singular, plural. "Well now," it said, layered with amusement. "This universe has grown interesting." Thor felt a familiar chill. "Tricksters," he said. "And worse." One of the apertures brightened, and a figure emerged, tall and radiant, armored in light that bent perception around it. "Thor Odinson," the figure said warmly. "You've wandered far from your myth." Thor stepped forward instinctively. "State your name." The figure smiled. "Names are limiting, but you might call me a shaper." Another voice cut in, cold and precise. "He is one of many." From the shadowed aperture, a second presence manifested, angular, predatory. Its form flickered between states, never fully settling. "And we," it said, "are the collectors." Picard raised his voice. "You are in Federation space. Identify your intentions." The Shaper laughed softly. "Intention, such a quaint concept. We observed an anomaly and followed it. A god who does not rule. A universe that resists narrative collapse." The Collector's presence shifted closer. "Such things must be cataloged or consumed." Thor's hammer hummed faintly at his side. The liquid glass aperture flared, and a third presence spoke, voice layered with echoes of countless timelines. "We are the observants," it said. "We do not interfere, but this convergence violates long-standing accords." Picard felt the weight of the moment settle fully. "You're arguing jurisdiction over existence." "Yes," the Shaper said cheerfully. "No," the observance corrected. "We are negotiating consequences." Thor's eyes flashed. "You speak as though this realm is an object." The collector tilted its shifting head. All realms are. Picard stepped forward, his voice steady. This one is not available for experimentation, consumption, or narrative manipulation. The Shaper regarded him with newfound interest. Bold, mortal, persistent, Picard replied. The Shaper laughed again. I like him. Thor turned to Picard. They will not leave simply because we ask. Picard nodded. Then we don't ask. He turned to Worf. Red alert, shields up, notify Starfleet Command. All frequencies open. To Thor, he said quietly, if this becomes a fight, can you hold them? Thor did not answer immediately. He looked at the three apertures, felt the immense forces pressing against reality. Not alone, he said honestly. Picard nodded. Then we do what we always do. Riker grinned tightly. We improvise. The Shaper's presence shifted. How delightful. Resistance. The collector's aperture expanded, dark energy bleeding into local space. Commencing evaluation. Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir now glowing brightly. Lightning crawled along its surface, but he did not strike. Listen to me, he said, voice carrying through every layer of space. This universe does not exist to entertain you. The observant's voice sharpened. Thor Odinson, your intervention biases outcomes. Good, Thor replied. So does indifference. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stars screamed. Space convulsed as conflicting forces collided, not yet in violence, but in pressure, testing each other's limits. The Enterprise's shields flared, struggling to compensate. Captain, Data said urgently, structural integrity fields are holding, but marginally. Picard took a breath. All power to shields. Prepare emergency warp if necessary. Thor closed his eyes briefly. He could feel the story tightening, drawing threads together. This was the moment the custodians had feared. Not a battle of strength, but a declaration of intent. Thor opened his eyes, lightning blazing. Then hear this, he said to the converging entities. You are not the authors here. You are guests. The universe trembled. The declaration did not silence the convergence. It provoked it. The three apertures pulsed in response, each reacting according to its nature. The Shaper's golden light intensified, casting long, impossible shadows across the Enterprise bridge. The Collector's darkness thickened, tendrils of void-like energy creeping outward as if tasting the edges of reality. The Observant's glass-like distortion fractured into overlapping reflections, each showing a different possible outcome, some peaceful, most catastrophic. The Enterprise shuddered violently. Inertial dampeners at maximum, Data reported. Hull stress increasing across all sections. Maintain position, Picard ordered. We will not retreat unless absolutely necessary. Thor felt the strain ripple through the ship like a living thing. He placed a hand against a console, grounding himself, sharing the burden unconsciously. The vibration lessened, if only slightly. The Shaper regarded this with interest. You bind yourself to them, it said. Fascinating. You diminish your own leverage. Thor looked directly at the luminous figure. No, he replied. I redefine it. The Collector's voice cut in, sharp and hungry. Inefficient. Attachment creates vulnerability. And yet, Picard said calmly, it also creates resilience. The Observant spoke again, slower now. The probability curves are shifting. This reality exhibits anomalous resistance to collapse. That's because it's built on cooperation, Picard said, not dominance. The Shaper laughed softly. Such confidence from a species barely past its infancy. And yet, Picard replied, we're still here. Thor stepped forward again, standing fully between the apertures and the Enterprise. Mjolnir lifted slightly from his hand, humming with restrained power. "You want assessment?" Thor said. "Then assess this. If you force this convergence, you will not simply fracture this universe." The collectors leaned closer. "You threaten us." Thor's voice lowered, steady and dangerous. "I inform you." The observance reflection shifted rapidly, timelines collapsing and reforming in their surface. Data indicates escalation beyond acceptable loss parameters. The Shaper's light dimmed marginally. "Loss is subjective. So is value," Picard countered. The collectors began drawing energy inward, preparing to act. Space around their aperture warped, pulling matter and light toward it. "Captain," Worf said grimly, "weapons are ineffective against targets of this nature." Picard nodded. "We're not firing." Thor raised Mjolnir fully now, lightning arcing not outward, but inward, wrapping around him in a controlled sphere. The air on the bridge crackled, consoles flickering as power readings spiked. Troy gasped softly. "He's not attacking. He's anchoring." Thor spoke again, voice echoing through subspace itself. "This universe has chosen its path. You may observe, you may learn, but you will not feed upon it." The collectors recoiled slightly, their void tendrils faltering. The Shaper tilted its head. "You bind narrative with will alone." Thor smiled grimly. "I learned from mortals." The observance voice rose, layered with urgency now. "Continuing this convergence risks systemic destabilization across adjacent realities." The Shaper hesitated. For the first time, its light flickered with uncertainty. "You would deny us," it said slowly, "on principle." "Yes," Picard said simply. Thor held his ground, lightning blazing brighter but still contained. He was not striking. He was refusing. The universe responded, not with force, but with alignment. The distortions began to weaken, their edges blurring as local reality asserted itself. The Enterprise's shields stabilized. Structural stress dropped incrementally. Data's voice carried a note of wonder. "Captain, local space-time coherence is increasing against projected models." The collector's presence thrashed, then withdrew slightly. "This anomaly resists assimilation." The Shaper sighed, something like disappointment in its tone. "Very well, this iteration will persist." The observance reflection smoothed, possibilities narrowing. Convergence terminated, for now. One by one, the apertures began to collapse. Before the Shaper withdrew completely, it addressed Thor once more. "You have changed the equation, God of Thunder. Others will come, some less conversational." Thor inclined his head. "Then I will be ready." The collectors vanished into nothingness, their darkness snapping shut like a wound sealing itself. The observance faded last, their final words lingering like an echo. "This universe has asserted authorship that is rare." Silence fell. The stars returned to normal. Space settled, as if exhausted. On the bridge, systems stabilized fully. Consoles ceased flickering. The hum of the Enterprise returned to its steady rhythm. Riker let out a long breath. "Well, that was terrifying." Data nodded. "Agreed. Fascinating, but terrifying." Picard turned to Thor. For a moment, he simply studied him. "You didn't fight them," Picard said quietly. Thor lowered Mjolnir, its glow fading. "Because this was not a battle to win. It was a line to hold," Picard nodded slowly. "And you held it." Troy approached Thor, her expression awed. "They backed down," she said. "Not because they feared you." Thor met her gaze. "They feared what this place represents." Picard straightened, authority returning to his voice. "All departments, stand down from red alert. Log this encounter as first contact." Riker raised an eyebrow. First contact with what, exactly? Picard allowed himself a faint smile. With the realization that this universe is no longer invisible. As the Enterprise resumed course, Thor felt the tension drain from his muscles. The storm within him quieted, replaced by something steadier. He had not conquered. He had committed, and the universe had responded in kind. The aftermath of the convergence did not bring celebration. It brought reflection. The Enterprise moved slowly now, not out of damage or fear, but because every system was being scrutinized, every log reviewed, every crew member quietly processing what they had witnessed. Starfleet Command acknowledged Picard's initial report with a level of urgency that bordered on disbelief. Requests for detailed sensor data, crew testimony, and supplemental logs flooded in, each one carrying the unspoken realization that something fundamental had changed. Thor felt it most clearly when the ship slept. Late in the Alpha shift cycle, he stood alone in the Arboretum, surrounded by carefully cultivated plants from 100 worlds. Life that had been carried, protected, and given space to grow. He rested one hand against a tree native to Earth, its leaves whispering softly in the controlled air. For centuries, he had defined himself by battles survived and enemies defeated. Now, he was measured by what he prevented. Footsteps approached quietly. Picard entered the Arboretum without ceremony, hands clasped behind his back. "I thought I might find you here," he said. Thor smiled faintly. "It reminds me that life persists without thunder." Picard regarded the greenery thoughtfully. "Starfleet Command wants you debriefed, thoroughly. There's concern." Thor nodded. "I expected as much." "They're not questioning your intentions," Picard added. "They're questioning inevitability." Thor turned to face him. "That I will draw storms wherever I go." "Yes," Picard admitted. "And whether we are prepared to face them." Thor considered that in silence for a moment. "Then the question is not whether storms come," he said. "It is whether this ship will always be where it can matter." Picard met his gaze. "That's a dangerous way to think." Thor's eyes softened. "So is hiding." Picard allowed himself a small smile. "You're learning our particular brand of recklessness." Before Thor could respond, the ship's lights dimmed slightly. Not a power failure, a deliberate modulation. Data's voice came through the comm. "Captain Picard, Thor Odinson, you are requested in the observation lounge. There is an unexpected development." They arrived moments later. The stars beyond the viewport were unchanged, but something was different. A faint shimmer traced the edges of space, barely perceptible, like a ripple in glass. Troy stood near the viewport, her expression unsettled. "I can feel echoes," she said, "like impressions left behind." Data gestured to a holographic projection. "Long-range sensors indicate residual narrative energy." Riker blinked. "Narrative energy." Thor nodded slowly. "The convergence left scars, not wounds, memories." Picard frowned. "Memories of what?" "Of choice," Thor replied. "Of resistance." The shimmer coalesced slightly, resolving into a diffuse, humanoid outline formed entirely of light and probability. It was not fully present, more like an afterimage given momentary coherence. The figure spoke, voice quiet and resonant. "You were not meant to be alone in this." Thor felt a chill. "You linger," he said. "We are what remains," the figure replied. "Fragments of paths not taken." Picard stepped forward. "Explain." The figure turned its indistinct gaze toward him. "The convergence tested authorship. This universe asserted it. Others will follow." Riker frowned. "Follow how?" "By resisting," the figure said. "By questioning. By choosing." Thor felt the weight of those words settle heavily. "Then the story spreads." "Yes," the figure replied. "And stories attract readers." Picard exhaled slowly. "You're saying we've started something?" "You always do," the figure said gently. Thor looked at Picard. "This is what they feared." "And yet," Picard replied, "we would make the same choice again." The figure seemed to smile, though its features were indistinct. "That is why this universe endures." The shimmer began to fade. "Wait," Thor said. "What becomes of us?" The figure's voice softened. "You continue, as you always have, together." It vanished. Silence filled the lounge once more. "Well," Riker said, after a long pause, "that was unsettlingly poetic." Data tilted his head. "I believe it was encouraging." Picard turned to Thor. "They see you as a catalyst." Thor shook his head slowly. "No, as a participant." Picard nodded. "Then so do I." Later, in his quarters, Thor sat alone, Mjolnir resting across his knees. He traced the runes along its surface, each one etched with history, sacrifice, and purpose. For the first time, the hammer felt lighter. Not because its weight had changed, but because he no longer carried it alone. He had allies now, not subjects, not worshippers, allies. And somewhere beyond the stars, forces ancient and curious took note. The universe had spoken. It had chosen to stand. The Enterprise continued onward, not fleeing what it had stirred, but accepting it. Thor felt the difference immediately. The sense of scrutiny was no longer sharp, no longer invasive. It had become distant, contemplative. The universe was not closing in around him anymore. It was watching what he would do next. Picard stood on the bridge as the ship transitioned out of warp, the familiar hum settling into a steady cadence. The stars ahead were unremarkable, ordinary even, and that, somehow, felt like a victory. "Status," Picard said. "All systems nominal," Data replied. "No anomalous activity detected within operational range." Riker leaned back slightly. "For the first time in a while, that sounds reassuring." Troy smiled, faintly. "The tension has eased," she said. "Not gone, but acknowledged." Thor stood near the view screen, Mjolnir resting comfortably at his side. He felt grounded in a way he had not since Asgard fell. Not rooted to a throne, not bound by prophecy, anchored by choice. Picard approached him quietly. "Starfleet Command has reached a decision," he said. Thor turned. "I suspected they would." "They are aware of what you represent," Picard continued. "The risks, the attention, the possibilities." "And," Thor asked, "their verdict." Picard met his gaze evenly. "You are welcome to remain aboard this ship, as long as you choose to." Thor searched Picard's face for hesitation and found none, only resolve. "You offer me no rank," Thor said. "No," Picard replied. "Only responsibility." Thor smiled, something warm and genuine. "Then I accept." Picard nodded once. "Good." Days passed, then weeks. Thor did not command. He did not dominate. He learned. He watched engineers coax miracles from metal and math. He listened as scientists debated the nature of existence with more courage than fear. He observed how a ship of mortals faced the infinite not with worship, but with curiosity. And when trouble came, as it always did, he stood where he was needed, A rogue spatial anomaly threatening a colony was calmed, not shattered, guided gently back into collapse. A hostile entity testing Federation borders withdrew after encountering not brute force, but refusal to be intimidated. In each instance, Thor acted not as a god imposing will, but as a guardian lending strength. The custodians did not intervene. They watched. In 10 forward, Guinan raised a glass one evening as Thor joined her at the bar. "You look settled," she said. Thor considered that. "I look present," she smiled. "That's rarer than you'd think." On the bridge, Data approached Picard with a final report. "Captain, long-term projections indicate a sustained decrease in external reality incursions within our operational sector." Picard raised an eyebrow. "Because of Thor." "Yes," Data said, "and because of us." Picard nodded. "Then let's keep doing what we do." Thor stood once more at the view screen, watching a distant star flare and fade. He thought of Asgard, of Loki, of battles fought and lost and won. He thought of the universe that had tried to correct him and failed. He was no longer an error. He was a variable the universe had chosen to keep. Picard joined him one last time, both men watching the stars in companionable silence. "You once asked what kind of god does not need a throne," Picard said. Thor smiled softly. "I believe I have my answer." "And what is that?" Picard asked. "One who serves," Thor replied, "without ruling." Picard inclined his head. "Sounds familiar." The Enterprise surged forward, engines carrying it into the unknown once more. Not as conqueror, not as correction, but as a testament. Somewhere beyond perception, ancient equations adjusted again. New variables were added, not of power, not of control, but of choice. And the universe, vast and unpredictable, moved on.